true.
Okay. It's like, I will try my best.
Just for reference, for those of you who dropped in, it just went live. We're talking about cursing, so we cannot guarantee you. We'll try to keep it as family friendly as possible, but we can't guarantee you that there won't be a curse word dropped here or there. So just so you're aware. Well, so welcome back to Page Chewing, and with Steve Talks Books, the wonderful Steve Talks Books, and myself, P.L Stuart. We are here with two more fabulous guests, and today we have the amazing P.S. Livingstone and Virginia McClain. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just quickly about myself, I'm P.L Stuart. I'm the author of the Drowned Kingdom saga. That includes the Drowned Kingdom and the Last of the Atlanteans. And I will let Steve introduce himself before we go on to our guests.
Yeah, I'm Steve. I'm Steve Talks Books, and I like to read a lot and like to talk to people. So it's always great to meet new people and to interact and just have a fun conversation. So I'm grateful that PL has we've started the series and have met so many interesting and lovely people. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks to PS and also to Virginia for taking time out of their day to chat with us today.
Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Me too.
Awesome. Well, so again, we have two creatives that are quite well known in the writing community, but for those who perhaps don't know as much about you as I'd like to, can you ladies tell us a bit about yourselves and what you write and what you do, things like that? Whoever would like to go first.
Virginia, it's all yours.
All right. I'm Virginia McClain. I am a fantasy author. I write in two subgenres at the moment, urban fantasy, humorous urban fantasy specifically, and epic fantasy is the other one, although it's that series is also branching into action adventure fantasy romp. And so I have a total of 8 full-length books out to date. And I'm also one of the founders of QuaranCon, along with the lovely P.S. Livingstone. And yeah, I think those are the things I'm most well known for. Blade's Edge, my debut novel from 2015, was a finalist in the 2019 SPFBO, and people, perhaps some have heard of that. Yeah, I think that's about it. People have been listing me lately as like an SPSFC judge, but the truth is I failed as an SPSFC judge. I was in for like the first half of the first round, and then I got overwhelmed with everything else, and I'm not a judge anymore because I couldn't keep up with all the reading for the contest. It's an awesome contest, and everyone should check it out. But I cannot call myself a judge for SPSFC anymore accurately. So yeah, I think that's me.
Okay. Yeah, so, well, P.S. Livingstone, or Pam, because we talked about this, it's totally fine. Call me Pam. So, yes, like Virginia, well, she and I met and bonded over QuaranCon. And we're still going for our 3rd year. So, yeah, I'm an editor. Mostly sort of fantasy, science fiction. I do some romance, some contemporary. I do educational and scientific editing, which is not related at all. My background is zoology, so I'm a scientist kind of by trade way back, and kind of came into this a bit later. I'm also a ghostwriter. So I have a number of books out there, none of which have my name on it, and I can't tell you what they are because I have a PDA. But I'm hoping to have my debut should be out later this year, which is Awakening, the Transcendent Saga, which we've had many conversations, Virginia and I. I'm still kind of going with contemporary epic, which I know doesn't really mean anything, but it's kind of very epic on scale. Starts off urban, ends up really not urban, and is set kind of in modern times. I think part of the reason I probably haven't got it out sooner is, as you've probably guessed from what I've just said, I don't quite know where it fits. So I invented a term and I've been running with it until I find something better.
Fake it till you make it. That's you'll create your own subgenre. Perfect.
That's pretty much my life experience. Fake it till you make it and hope for the best, really.
If it's working for you, it's
certainly like the
Just-
motto of CorinCon. Fake it till you make it.
12 raccoons in a trench coat.
Wow.
Which is Virginia. Well, she calls herself this, so
I do. It's not. Pam's not. You know,
I'm not smearing her. She fully recognizes that she has 12 raccoons in a trench coat, and I think people ended up deciding I was some kind of robot. I think was where they went with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was again self-described, right? I was like, well, I'm 12 raccoons in a trench coat, but I think Pam is human, and then you were like, no, I'm a robot, right?
I think I wasn't human, and you said yes, robot, and I think I was fine with that.
Oh, okay, maybe it was that, yeah.
Okay, we're getting some secrets. You're getting some secrets out of.
Yeah, well, and as you can see, we're very serious people.
I can tell, absolutely.
We take ourselves very seriously.
Yes.
Before we get to questions, I want to give Steve a chance to speak and probably catch up with some comments and people saying hi and popping in. So
I just want to say hi to Cool Gamer is here. Hey, Cool Gamer. And of course, our friend Taylor from Maybe Between the Pages. And also David Green is here. Hey, David.
Hey, Dave.
yeah, awesome.
So Pam, I did have a quick question well, it may not be quick, but you mentioned ghostwriting. How does that process work? So are you approached to fill in gaps, or how much?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, what I've been the series I've been working on recently, which is a series of novellas, which is essentially basically one long story in 5 parts, realistically. I've been given very much free rein to write whatever I want. That's not necessarily the norm in ghostwriting, so I'm quite lucky in that regard with what I'm doing at the moment, which is kind of give me a sort of rough, this is the genre we want to be writing in, and you go ahead and kind of do that. And obviously the editing is done. Sometimes I get pieces back, sometimes not. It depends. Other times, people have an outline that they want a story about this, and they will come to you, with that and sort of say, this is the story I want to tell. Some people have got really detailed character names, sort of the world they want it set in. And people have various reasons. Sometimes they just want to read the story that they have in their head, and they're prepared to pay for that. Other times, obviously, people are putting it out. Certainly, sort of the Kindle market for shorter sort of fiction, like 10,000 words. Some of it not in a genre I want to write, if I'm honest. I have no issue writing, erotica or romance, and that's a lot of what I do. But there's some really, really niche, way past the line of erotica stuff that I don't want to write. I know it's quite lucrative, and I know there are people making a reasonable amount writing this really niche market stuff, but that's not really what I want to write. So I have steered clear of that as a personal choice. There has been really only one time, other than saying I won't do that, where someone has presented a story that I'm like, I'm not writing this because it's just not okay stuff. Just nothing, erotic wise, but actually just really inappropriate kind of tropey, slightly racist stuff that I'm just like, I don't want any part of this. Find somebody else to write it. That's fine. So yeah, it really depends. Who I'm working with just now, I've got pretty much free rein, which is a lovely position to be in because they trust me to make up a story and write it, and that's quite nice. Does that answer well enough, or?
It's really interesting how that whole process works, and how I'm sure there's privacy that you have to keep things certain things private. So how do people know that you've written something? If I wanted someone to ghostwrite something for me, how would I find you? How does that process work?
Well, I used to advertise on Fiverr, and realistically, you are a lot of the time, and unless you're writing for like big companies that like the ghostwriters of things like some of the Star Wars stuff are reasonably well known. It's not really ghostwriting, it is, because obviously their name's not on it, but some of these people are known. A lot of the time for me, it's just people have to, I would send them samples of my own work, short stories, pieces of my own fiction that I've done, and they would judge me from that. I wouldn't be able to tell them what I'd written for most of them, simply because, you know, it's written under a pen name. It's small publishing companies will hire various ghostwriters to write for them. Whether people, I suppose, agree with that from a ethical perspective. I mean, I know there has been issue over the years on Twitter, someone was discovered to not be what they said they were, but you know, I think there are probably some people do have the ethical issues with those, but for me, it's a business. I guaranteed a wage. I get paid by the word. I write a lot of extra ands. No,
all the thens and that's and so.
That's it. I could write they are or there. I should probably write they are. It's really important. There's no contractions in that book anywhere. No, none whatsoever. But no, I mean, I think, you know, you also get ratings and things like people provide feedback for you, you know, and they can do that anonymously. So you can get that. A lot of my work has come word of mouth. People who kind of, you know, or groups who talk about that type of thing, and that's been passed on to me. I'm not taking on any commissions at the moment because I have this booked for the foreseeable future. And with my other editing work, I probably couldn't take on another ghostwriting job at the moment. But yeah, I did use Fiverr. It's a mixed bag. I probably wouldn't return to it. If I'm honest, people want to pay you an awful lot less than it's yeah. They want to pay you an awful lot less than it's worth. It's the same with a lot of these things, you know, proofreading jobs. Somebody came to me, they wanted 100,000 word proofread and they wanted to pay me £100. I mean, I'm sure it's a great opportunity for me. I decided to turn it down anyway.
Yeah, you're lost though. I'm sure.
I'm sure, yeah, because I'd have made big money if I'd just done them that favor, because it was going to be huge. But
right,
I know I'm just going to have to live with the disappointment.
The sacrifices we make, hey?
Indeed.
Wow. So I'm just, you know, I'm listening to PS and for both of you, Virginia, I between the two of you, I swear, you two are all over the place. I always see, you know, you're always involved in something, right? I don't know when you both rest, but I loved watching your QuarCon, I guess, to wrap up the debrief post video where you guys are just totally zonked, like, oh my god, this is amazing, but we can't get off the couch. Like, you know what I mean? I love watching that. It was awesome, right? But again, just hearing PS describe, you know, how busy she is. Virginia, I can't even go there. You know, I know, Virginia, you were you know, involved in leading the Kickstarter for the Alchemy of Sorrow anthology. Obviously, you're writing your own books. You know, read Sarah's Claude, loved it. Plan to pick up the rest of all of your books. You know, so you're busy writing. PS obviously writing as well, and you know, I know PS will never brag about it, but she was a page turner finalist. I guess that's for an unpublished work. She doesn't. I know you. I'm going to plug you, even if you don't plug yourself, right? So,
thank you.
But and of course, we know Virginia with SPFBO finalist judging in PSFC, the science fiction version. I know you said you had to pull out, but do you feel? And it may be just, you know, I think a lot of creators we're high achievers, right? We wanna do a lot, but do you feel that with all the things you're doing, you're just spread too thin? Because I know sometimes I go, oh, you know, PL, you've kind of really spread yourself too thin here. Like, do you feel that a lot in terms of the pressure to write your own stuff? You know, some like PS, you're ghostwriting. Virginia, you're co-writing with other authors. You're trying to get funding for Kickstarter. You're doing QuarCon together. You're doing all these things. Like, do you feel, or maybe you don't feel spread thin? It's just exciting and fun, or
I definitely got to a point where I felt spread too thin, and that's why I dropped out of judging SPSFC. Like, I really wanted to do that. I thought it would be a fun way to read more indie sci-fi, because I haven't read, like, I read a lot of, or a decent amount of sci-fi just in general, but I hadn't read a lot of indie sci-fi, and I was like, I'd love to get into that. And you know, Spiffbo is such a great way to find fantasy books. I would love to, you know, and then also just giving back to that community in particular, and just like, you know, because the judges, they volunteer their time to read and add exposure to books, and I wanted to be a part of that. And and then I just got overwhelmed, and something had to give, and it was that. Like, I was looking at all the things that I had to do as I was getting. We had just started the planning phases of QuaranCon for this year. This was back in like December, January, and I was gearing up for that Kickstarter for the Alchemy of Sorrow, and I, also still hoping to work on my own stuff. And actually, in truth, haven't worked on any of my own stuff for a few months now. But I just something had to give, and it wound up being that. And I, like I said, I don't feel great about it, because I said I would do it, and then I felt like I was, letting down the judging team that I was on. But luckily, those are all teams of at least 10 judges, and so there were more people there to keep up with it, and everyone was very understanding and very kind about it. But I still felt bad for letting go of a commitment, right? But I had to. I reached a point where I couldn't even make myself read the books, not because they were bad at all, but just because every time I sat down to read, I started to feel horribly guilty and stressed about all the other things that I wasn't doing. and it was not a healthy place to be mentally. So something had to give, and so that was it. And in the meantime, I still haven't gotten back to writing my own stuff yet. The Kickstarter is pretty all consuming. It's done in terms of we reached our funding goal and closed out.
Yeah,
But
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And it was, massively successful, almost 400% funded. Really just a fabulous experience all around, but it's a ton of work to run. And now we have to actually get the book out and get it to all our backers and stuff. And it's a bunch more. I'm the coordinator of all of that. So I'm like, okay, we got to get all the art from the artists, and then I have to put together the formatting, and we have to get our editing from our editor, and then all that, and layouts and stuff. And then the special edition is going to require additional design work because we have to do foil and all this stuff. It's great. It's all stuff I enjoy doing. It's just a lot of work. And between that and my regular graphic design work, it's going to be a while before I can write again, I think. But so yes, definitely feel spread too thin sometimes. But I'll let Pam answer for herself.
I can do. QuaranCon was quite insane. I'm quite notorious for not sleeping, as Virginia will know. So the answer is that, something has to go. Oh, sleep. I can do without that. Which does happen more often than it should. But I function quite well on no sleep, actually, so it's okay. But yeah, I certainly felt very stretched thin before I left my full-time job. I was teaching full-time, and that for many reasons was not a good environment. But very, very toxic in general, and not good for creativity, and just was it was making me extremely stressed. And I was trying to do editing and continue my editing training, which I still keep doing, and to keep building my skills and whatnot. So I did feel that way, and basically I did hope to sort of go down part-time and leave maybe in a year or two, and then got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to quit. And that was absolutely the best decision I ever made. It just allowed me to do this during the day. And I don't work 9 to 5. I do sometimes write in the evenings where the inspiration takes me, but I can have my weekends now when I'm not doing QuaranCon. And actually, if I go out for an evening, it's not a choice between going out with my friends for an evening or writing. I can now do both, and I decided to lose the thing which was making me very unhappy. And to be honest, it was never the kids. The kids were actually great. I like teaching kids. It's all the adults in teaching that make it miserable, and the management. If any of you are watching, you know my thoughts on you. Time management, certainly, for me, I do spread myself thin at certain times, like when QuaranCon's on. I'm also the area head for events for WorldCon in Glasgow in 2024, because I am a glutton for punishment.
You're too
Um,
competent, Pam. We've talked about this. You
I
just
know, I know. I need to suck more and stop doing things well, and then nobody will ask me to do
be
anything.
less competent. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We did talk about that. I should stop doing things well. If I do it badly, just nobody will invite me back. You
Yeah.
know. So yeah. But I mean, I enjoy this aspect of it too much. You know, the talk, chatting to everybody. I mean, I would never have met Virginia if I hadn't gone, oh, somebody's talking about doing a con thing on Twitter. I'm up for that. And I would never have, met her. And she's been so important in my life, and just made me feel a really big part of the community and allowed me to make friends. And then meeting obviously Steve and PL, which I wouldn't have done if it wasn't for CornCon probably, and just so many other people within the writing community. So I will always make time for this because this just makes me happy, and because I work for myself, I can fit the other stuff in as and when. And if I need to take a break, I can also do that because I work for myself. So yeah, sometimes spread too thin, but I wouldn't change it.
And Virginia, with the Kickstarter, if someone was in a similar position that you were before you started the Kickstarter, and they came to you for advice on what should I look out for starting, I want to start a Kickstarter for this project I want to work on, what advice would you give to them?
Oof. It really depends on what the project is and what they're hoping to achieve with the Kickstarter. So I think the first thing is to have a plan for that specifically. Like what are your specific goals for Kickstarter? It's a great tool for certain things. It is not a panacea. It is not going to work for everything. And depending on what you want to do with it, there are different ways to go about it. There are some authors, of course, everyone has seen recently the Brendan Sanderson Kickstarter and the Will White Kickstarter, and like those massive projects that are just blowing everything out of the water. Those are fabulous. To achieve that kind of thing, you have to come with your own massive audience, right? So it's not reasonable to set those kinds of expectations for yourself. I've used Kickstarter twice now successfully. The very first one I did, actually, I funded Blade's Edge's debut. I was a brand new author with zero following and no idea what I was doing outside of a lot of research and forums and stuff. And I was like, I'm going to kickstart this book so that I can pay for a proper edit and fabulous cover art and formatting and all this stuff. And so I ran a Kickstarter for like, was it $4,800 or something like that, $4,500. I can't remember what the original goal was. And I made only a couple hundred more than that, like just barely in like the last day. It was a much less, fast moving Kickstarter. It really took the entire month to hit our goal, my goal. But I was a lone author with no following at all to speak of. I had zero readership except for like a half a dozen people from a web serial site that I had been using. But I succeeded, and that enabled me to get a really professional looking cover and professional editing and all of that, and start off in the black for Blade's Edge. I have every single sale of that book has been at a profit because I was never at a deficit because of that Kickstarter, which was amazing. And I highly recommend doing that if you are an indie author or you want to be an indie author and you don't have the budget for those things. And it doesn't have to be what I did. I paid $1,000 for original illustration, but you could do a Kickstarter and still be hiring someone to do a $300 composite cover. But if you can't afford those $300 and you can't afford another however much for editing, like you could run a Kickstarter for a much smaller amount of money and then still wind up covering your initial outlay. And I recommend that. But it's hard to do. Kickstarters are a lot of work. So that's the other thing that I would tell people is to remember that a Kickstarter basically turns into a full-time job for the entire month. You spend, especially when you don't have a following already, you're going to spend that whole month just getting people to look at your Kickstarter to hopefully back it. And the most successful Kickstarters do well with a little bit of investment beforehand. And that's unfortunate too, because again, if you don't have the funds to pay for your cover or whatever, that's really hard. You can't show off the cool cover that you hope to have because you can't afford to do it beforehand, right? You could risk it if it's something that you're like, well, I could afford to do this as long as I make it back. And you could bet on yourself for that amount of money and hope that you're going to get paid back. And that can definitely be worth doing. But you can also, what I did for mine was I actually drew sketches of like stick figures fighting dragons and stuff, and was like, this is how bad it would be if I did my own cover. So everyone please help. And use that as like a comic beat in my video and everything else. I did have some graphic design skills even then, so I used that to sort of put together some images with some decent titling. Although looking back on them now with my much more extensive graphic design experience, I'm like, ooh. But those kinds of, do whatever you can for the budget you've got, and make it as good as possible, as compelling as possible, and then work from there. Honestly, this Kickstarter for the Alchemy of Sorrow, having 13 authors total, plus our editor and artists and stuff that we'd already started to contract, because I knew I was very certain we were going to fund, like with as many people, with as wider readership as we were bringing in. I was like, I had no doubt setting out that we were going to actually hit our base goal. By the actual reaction and the amount of support and community like love that we got, and how successful, like we hit every single stretch goal and had to make up more. That was amazing. That I was not expecting. But at any rate, with a team of people, you know, like I was the main point person on the Kickstarter, but Intisar Kanani was immensely key. Like she was she was my support structure and all of that, making sure that I didn't turn into a pile of goo throughout the entire process, and also just doing so much of what needed to be done and helping me with calculations and double checking everything, because I'm really bad about forgetting small details. All of that. She was instrumental in making that successful. And Crystal Matar and ML Wong both helped with posting and doing other pieces of that. And then just our entire crew was always like tweeting about it, posting it on their social media. We had a lot of people who were able to amplify it, and their audiences amplifying it further. And it just like, that is a magical recipe for success that I absolutely did not have for my first Kickstarter. So then that's you can set your sights on different things there, right? Like, and you're not just like, okay, well, will I nail biting, like make my initial goal? Like, I know I went ahead and invested in artwork and stuff because I knew we were going to get that back. And even if we didn't at this stage in my career, I can afford a little bit of outlay for that. So I knew I would, you know, be able to sort it out. But you know, that's a very different scenario from the like one person, no audience yet Kickstarter. And so those are two different scenarios, and there are many others that you can do. Like some people use them just for special editions, some people use them for just the audiobook, some people use them for like, there's so many options. So you really have to have that goal clear in your head. And then you have to be prepared for some really wonky math, because Kickstarter math is this interesting sliding scale, right? Because if the more people who pledge for rewards, the more rewards you have to produce. So your costs go up with every single backer. And it's not just because of the way that Kickstarter calculates that. It's not just like you can say like, well, this is our goal, and so we have to sell this many of this thing. If you only have one reward tier, you could maybe do it that way. You could be like, okay, we just have to like plan on our costs are going to be 100 of this thing, and that will cover everything, and great, we're good. But for the most part, you want a mix of things, right? So your ebook doesn't really have a physical production cost, right? But then your physical books have the printing costs and the shipping costs added in. And you can't assume that you're going to fund on all of one thing. And then but every time you know, like our special edition, every time someone pledged for the special edition level, that, you know, like, oh, that's a really nice big bump, except that, you know, a huge portion of that is the cost of making it. And then, yeah, anyway, it's very complicated. You have to sit down and be prepared for that level of math and the way it works. There's a lot of resources on Kickstarter that you can use for that. But anyway, just be prepared to really work. And sorry, that was a massively long answer. But the Kickstarters are a lot. So.
Wow. Well, I think I'll definitely be tapping your, you know, DMing you, begging for counsel in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're going to do it.
Yeah. Either that or just become Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, work on that.
Yeah, I'll get right on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you figure out how to do that, if you can let me know, that would be great.
But please, PL, if you ever want advice on Kickstarters, let me know. I'm happy to help.
I appreciate that. I'm sure I could get a lot of great advice from you on a lot of things regarding writing and the writing industry. But thank you. That was an awesome answer. I'm going to embarrass PS for a second because I just love to do that. And so just a couple questions in general. So obviously, you, as I mentioned, Page Turner Award finalist. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And it's actually an award that I personally don't know a lot about. But when I started doing some research, it's obviously for unpublished works. So first of all, I have two questions here. First of all, what made you decide to submit an award for a work that you haven't yet put out there in the wild, and what was the thinking behind that? And second of all, can you tell us a bit more about what you can? I understand it's not out there yet, but about the Transcend Saga, because hopefully, so I can put it, I'm sure I'm going to put it at the top of my TBR regardless, but I want to be able to like get prepped for that. So, can you speak to that a bit?
Sure. So Page Turner Awards, I think, to be honest, it was kind of a why not, really, as opposed to, I think, going into any of these contests, you try and set your expectations as low as possible. Well, I do anyway. You think, reading and what people love is such a kind of subjective thing. I mean, I actually find myself really heartened by the Spiffbo top 2 this year because, they are
romance.
I know they're kissing books, as Crystal said to me earlier, which made me laugh because it's a Princess Bride. So is this a kissing book? It's very serious. But I love that. That that's what came top 2 because in the same way that. And I'm probably going to offend a whole bunch of people here. Literary fiction people look down on us genre folk. There's elements of the genre folk who look down on romance or urban fantasy romance, and it's like, well, I know people who really hate it and will wax lyrical about, literary fiction, they're looking down on me as a horror writer. And I'm like, you do it to people who write, stuff like that. And I think it's a really negative attitude generally. And I love the fact that there's some shift in that. So I went into Page Turner bottom line really just with a why not, put it out there and see how it does. And I kind of forgot about it until I got an email going, look out, we're announcing our finalists in the next week. And I'm like, oh, okay, I haven't been chucked then. And then I kind of didn't really think anything about it. And yeah, so that was really exciting. Obviously, I didn't go on to win, but that's okay. It was nice, and it was really just let's put it out there and see what happens. And I didn't put any more thought. I'd love to tell you there was some big, I planned this and then I'm going to do this with it. I didn't. I went, okay, stick that in, see what happens. So yeah, like most things in my life, just why not? It's how I usually end up in most things.
Yeah, it's just because I hadn't heard of many people submitting for awards prior to the book actually coming out. So was that, strategic on your part in terms of, well, I'll apply for this prior to the release and then I might throw my numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose then, if you are if you are successful on the back of that, you can release it with, oh, look, it won this thing before it even got out the door. That would have been nice, no doubt about it. But there wasn't really a greater strategy at work. I'd like to say I was that, savvy. I really wasn't.
I think you're being modest, but yeah, okay. We'll take it. So now the second part, what can you tell us about the Transcendent Saga beyond that?
So Transcendent Saga, it's essentially a story about there are more worlds, but primarily 3 transecting worlds of the demons, the fae, and the humans. There's a whole lot of sort of back history about when it was one world and then there was a war and then the various realms got split off to kind of keep the humans safe, I suppose, and kind of sort of melt into sort of mythology. The demons haven't really stuck to that plan. Some of them have, but others not so much. So it kind of revolves around my 2 sort of main characters, Aubrey and Cathal. So she essentially went through a sort of ordeal as a kind of sort of teenager, really, where she ended up in the Fae realm sort of accidentally, and had a pretty sort of traumatic experience. I won't kind of go into the details of that because that's kind of spoilery for the story, but kind of ends up, it sort of changes who she is, I suppose. And for all that it was traumatic, it kind of put her back on the right track of what she was doing with her life, because it was kind of going off the rails. So she has quite mixed feelings about it. But as a result of that, she's kind of has a sort of untapped power within her. And she's sort of been avoiding anything supernatural, but they kind of keep getting drawn to her because she doesn't really understand the power she has, and they don't really understand it, but creatures she come across are kind of like, oh, that's something, you know, and so she keeps putting them off, and then she kind of gets herself into a situation with what is essentially a demon smuggling ring, except they're smuggling humans. The demons smuggling humans rather than demons smuggling demons. And she kind of gets in, and they're essentially not going to let her go. Not that they've got her, but they're looking for her. And so the Fae basically come back to sort of, she basically calls them back into her life as her kind of only way of getting away from the other half. So she's kind of in this situation where she's stuck between the demons and the Fae, but she kind of is siding with them, and it's basically about her relationship with Cathal, and sort of what happens to them. And a lot of the stuff in the first book is not resolved because it's a very long thread into books 2 and 3. But the first book is really about her understanding about what she went through, who she is, starting to tap into the power that she has, but still kind of very much shying away from wanting to use it. But she knows that if she doesn't get a handle on it, it's more dangerous than if she actually does, because she keeps accidentally hurting people with it. So, yeah, like when she loses her temper or something like that, accidentally knocking somebody unconscious, and she's like realizes if she doesn't actually do something about this, she's going to end up really hurting people. So it's kind of that journey, and her, I suppose, understanding who she is and what she experienced and how it's helped shaped her life. And that's kind of, I suppose, where the first book's arc is. And then books 2 and 3 sort of focus more on the demons, and then the really past history and how that's kind of all coming to it's not as past as we think it is, shall we say.
Brandy had a comment. You had me at Faye. When is it coming out?
I'm hoping sort of November, December.
All right. I clear the decks for that now.
Okay. Oh, Phil, shh. Phil actually has read it, so.
Oh, he's so
Pam,
lucky.
do you have all 3 books written already?
No, I have book 1's written, but I'm just editing at the moment, some changes. Book 2 is half done, and I've written the very end of book 3.
There you go. Okay.
Weirdly, but none of the rest
That's
of
not
book
that
3
weird.
written.
That's
The very, very last scene is written.
Gotcha.
All right, I got some more room on my bookshelf to clear, and yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. Bring it on. Wasn't sure if Steve had some more comments or questions to catch up on. I can't tell.
Parker was mentioning Transcendent is such a great story. I've been pestering Pam to get it published.
Yeah, so he actually has read it. So he was one of my first beta readers, so he's biased.
Phil's a great guy, great author. Yeah, he's great stuff. So,
Pam, is this the one that I read the opening chapter for? Ages ago?
Maybe.
Okay. We'll talk later. I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'll ask you later. But I'm excited. Okay. Also,
thank you. I'm going all red.
Punk, right?
Hello, Punk, right?
Oh yeah,
I'm Smee, and finally December.
So, if I can ask you both, I guess separate responses. How did you get started in this whole writing thing? How did it become now that, you know, PS you're going to be releasing Planned Trilogy, and Virginia you've wrote, you know, more a dozen. Have you wrote a dozen books yet? I can't
Oh, are you sure? Because there's a bunch I've got just sitting around that aren't going to get published ever. I think before I released my first book, I'd written maybe 5 or 6. So that I just, you know, practice books.
Yeah. How did you get started in all this?
Do you want to go first, Pam? Or you want me to go?
You can go. That's fine. Yeah, no, you go.
I mean, like, so I have been a storyteller since I was a wee, tiny child, and I actually have some of my first stories written in crayon. My mom kept them and sent them to me once I started publishing. And they're actually, I should have gotten them out. They're in the other room, but really, really questionable spelling. Like some of the, yeah, anyway. Just, yeah, absolutely not great spelling. Yeah, but I just like, I started then, and but I didn't think I could be a writer. I didn't realize that was an option on the table. I was like, you know, I want to be a veterinarian, or I want to be an astronaut, or whatever, you know, until I was about 12 or 13, and I had, in grade 7, I had one of my English teachers read a short story that I'd written for her class, and said, you know, this is really good. Have you considered becoming a writer? And I was like, wait, what? I could be a writer? Me? Because every other, like, all the feedback I'd gotten from all of my other English teachers had basically just been like, you're really terrible at spelling, and your commas, like, you have no idea where a comma goes. Which was true. And I actually have a diagnosed disability for both those things. But I just, like, you know, so after all that feedback, as much as I liked writing stories and did it in my free time still, it just, being a writer didn't occur to me. Like, no, I can't be a writer. I'm terrible at spelling and commas, right? So she was the first one who was like, well, like, yeah, you are terrible at spelling and commas, but that's what editors are for. And like, you've got a great idea. You have a great mind for stories, for storytelling. And you know, I was a 7th grader, like, using metaphor and stuff, and she was very pleased with that, because when you're a grade 7 English teacher, that's probably really nice. But anyway, so it was there from then on. I was like, that is what I want to be. That was always the goal. It was just a question of how. And I went to school for Spanish. I first started off as a biology degree, but I didn't finish it. I switched to Spanish halfway through, and then I, you know, was teaching Spanish and started, like, submitting short stories for publication and stuff around then, and taught for a while. My daughter's desperately trying to get my attention, and I am anyone's wondering what this hand on my shoulder is. And so, but it wasn't until I'd been teaching for a while and writing a bunch in, like, every free moment, when I finally decided to sort of switch gears. And actually, my husband was like, hey, you know, we'd been talking about maybe starting a family, but we didn't want to stay in the US to do it because it was going to be super expensive. And my husband's Canadian. He's like, what if we moved to Winnipeg? Yeah.
Go Canada. Go Canada.
Yeah, Canada.
Go Canada.
Like, what if we moved to Winnipeg, and like, I got a job in movies with some of my friends, and like, you could write full time. And I was like, sold. I will move to Winnipeg if it means I can write full time. And that was in June of 2014. And basically, like, then I just started at it in earnest and worked on it from there. And like I said, I ran a Kickstarter for that first book, which I ran the Kickstarter in the fall of 2014. And then in January of 2015, I launched it. And I am now going to mute myself and find out what my daughter wants.
Cedar's hilarious. She really is. For me, I wrote a lot kind of as a kid and stuff, and things, and then I sort of stopped for a really long time, and then I kind of found a lot of my kind of old stories and kind of read them back and died a little inside at how cheesy they were. Some of it was just cringy teenage angst that if anybody ever saw, I would just, yeah. I was listening to The Cure quite a lot at the time, so that might explain it. It was very angsty and not at all good. It was just painful, genuinely painful. And I think The Crow had not long come out, and I had a bit of an obsession with that. So it was kind of like The Cure, Brandon Lee, you know, you can imagine what the content was, and it was awful. So yeah. No, it wasn't good. And I didn't write for a really long time, and then I was talking to my brother-in-law, who's a very creative person, more so in the kind of music industry. Like, is it kinesthesia, where they can sort of see the music in colors? Is that the right term?
I think so, yeah.
think so, yeah. And that kind of thing, talking about that and talking about how important creative outlets were. And I kind of thought, I don't have one anymore. I'm working all the time and teaching, and I'm doing this. And I know like planning lessons is creative to an extent, but it didn't feel that way. And so I started writing fan fiction, actually, if I'm totally honest. And I think that's a brilliant outlet for just like taking the world that somebody else has created and kind of going, can I write within this world? And I think that was kind of the first step for me, which was just kind of something that I really enjoyed, and just playing with it a little bit. And then I was keeping writing, and then I realized that what I was writing had nothing to do with what I already had written. Like that was where it started, but new worlds had been created, and I was loving it. And I hurt my back actually, and I was off work for about 3 months. So for the first month, I was off my face on painkillers, so that wasn't useful. But after that, I started writing because you get bored of watching TV. You're sitting there and it's like I've watched an entire series of Stargate SG-1, like all 9, 10, 11 seasons of this. Like I can't take any more. So I started actually sort of writing and then more, and then it just basically spilled out. I think this kind of stuff that had been there for a really long time, and then I kept doing it, and then I started getting involved in the writing community and in different writing groups. I went back to university and did creative writing courses as a night class and then at weekends, and sort of built up my experience that way. Then I started doing editing courses and proofreading courses and building up a client base that way, and it snowballed. And ta-da!
Now it's an avalanche.
Yeah, so when my book finally is inflicted on the world, you can all blame my brother-in-law. It's all his fault, really.
Sounds like a good brother-in-law.
He is, very much so. And he's a very talented DJ as well.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah. You may not have seen it, but Steve and I had the privilege of having Crystal Matar and Angela Gord on one of our previous page chewing. And again, it was great to hear both PS and Virginia, both of you, just cheering out loud for the romance, fantasy romance writers doing so well in this year's SPFPO. I have Rain and Root on the shelf. It's funny, I bought it specifically for that reason before it was even getting close to the finals, and I have to read it yet, but I'm very stoked to do that. Love Angela and Crystal's writing; they're phenomenal. So what is it about the romance? Because one thing I mentioned, I specifically asked Angela Crystal's question. In the general sphere of the fantasy community, there's some people who are not fans of romance in their fantasy. They don't like, never the twain shall meet. It's not something that's that they prefer to read. Steve's laughing over there, and Steve, you may one of those, and no disrespect if you're not. It's all good. Everybody has their taste, so it's not. I'm not picking on anybody. I personally love romance, and I love the romantic element. But first of all, I guess two-part question again. Why do you think that is? And afterwards, I'd like to hear Steve's opinion about why maybe the romantic element is as popular. Is it because people feel it's not well done in fantasy, or and so the other part obviously is like what makes you want to see that or read that in fantasy? So why is the first part is what's the hate on for romance in fantasy, or why do a lot of people not like it? And it may just be preference, taste, or maybe something else. And also, why do you like to see it in fantasy, specifically in fantasy?
I think there's a stigma attached to it, and I think there's an idea people, and it's fine also if you like this, but people say romance and they go, oh, Mills and Boone, oh, Jilly Cooper, and that's fine, if you want to enjoy it. And she was hugely successful. You've got your like 50 Shades of Grey again, which was hugely successful. I mean, like it or the content, or think it's badly written, or whatever the comments might be. she's made a ton of money out of that, and loads of people loved it. I may not love the books. I kind of love her, the writer, because I mean, she got so much abuse on Twitter. And I remember, I think the post when she came on, she was like, she's like, you know what? I'm a fat middle-aged woman. I wrote a sex book, and I'm now a millionaire. Go yourselves. But I thought, yes, I love you. You know, because she took all the criticism and she totally owned it. And I thought, yes, you are brilliant. Good for her. Good for her. You know, and I think that's fantastic. But there is that stigma, and I think we also need to be careful about romance or love story.
Yes.
Because they are different. And I would say that, like, the Legacy of Brightwash is a love story. And there's, you know, there's that element that goes through it, but it's not a romance. And even if it was, that's totally fine. But I think there's a big difference. And a love story written by a woman is a romance. A love story written by a man is a love story. And I think there is a stigma of that too, that women writing it are somewhat looked down on, not by everybody, by any manner of means. And I can see Virginia nodding, so I'm going to let her chime in here.
I was just going to say that I think, unfortunately, a huge portion of the stigma against romance is an underlying misogynistic bias that is not conscious in most of the people who embrace it even, but is in fact just the idea that it's women's stories and that it's not as valuable as part of the genre, which is problematic on multiple levels, because for one thing, romance is for everyone, not just women, and it's written by everyone, not just women. But it's also problematic because it's not, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing, and but it's also, I think that honestly a big part of the stigma against it is because it's actually so hard to do well that, for one thing, we get a ton of bad examples of it in popular fiction, and so people see those and they're like, oh, romance is terrible, and they're like, yes, but it's a poorly done romance. Poorly done anything is terrible. You know, like poorly done battle scenes are terrible too. But then also we see people who assume that, so for example, so to be genre romance, it has to have a happily ever after or a happily for now, right? That is a genre requirement. If it does not have that, it is not actually a genre romance. It may be a love story like Pam was talking about, or it may be a romantic something, right? Like it can be a romantic fantasy. I would say that it's possible that Legacy of the Brightwash is romantic fantasy. I actually haven't read it yet, so I can't.
I think it's romance as a subplot for me.
It could also be that, yeah.
It's a total driver for the characters. My book is very similar. It's absolutely, between Kathleen and Aubrey, it is the driving force that's pushing them together. But everything else that's happening around is irrelevant to that. Right. You know, that's the characters driven, but the plot is something separate as well. You know, and it's a huge thing in Brightwash. But it's not the whole point of the story at all.
Right. Whereas Reign and Ruin is legit a fantasy romance. It is a romance genre book. And that I actually have read and adored. I love that book. And that's a separate thing. And so I think people also, a lot of authors look at the whole happily ever after as a concept and think, oh, you know, for whatever reason that bothers them. They're like, well, that's boring. I already know how it's going to end. And I'm like, aha. You know how it's going to end, but do you have any idea how it's going to get from where we start to the end? Because a well-done romance sets things up so that you're like, this cannot possibly work. How is this supposed to work? I know these two people are supposed to wind up together, but that doesn't make any sense. And a well-done one presents enough character development and other issues being resolved so that at the end you have a nice, healthy romantic relationship that can then move forward from there. And holy crap, that's impressive. And it's really hard to do. And I think that a lot of people who look down on romance are just bad at it, and also maybe haven't seen good examples of it. And so they're like, oh no, that's not worth my time or whatever. Whereas like I look at romance, and I don't write romance genre myself currently because I'm not good enough at it to do it. But it's like a masterclass in building tension. That is,
I like the romance in your book. I like the romance in Sarah's Claw.
Thank you. I do include romantic subplots a lot, because I love romance, and it's part of the human experience, and I think it's an important one. And I would actually love to someday write like an actual romance. I just don't think I'm there yet. Like it requires a lot of skill in the subset of creating tension out of personal, very, very personal stakes only. Not someone's going to blow up the world, not someone's going to kill you, but just like your heart is on the line, like that, you know, and this person matters to you. You matter to yourself. And the best romances that I have read so outside of the fantasy genre, Courtney Milan writes amazing feminist romance. It's fabulous. Really healthy relationships with independent, driven people who are not, you know, winding up in, you know, weird, mutually destructive relationships, but in really like good, healthy relationships. And then T. Kingfisher writes amazing fantasy romance books that are also humorous and have like really solid non-fantasy plots as well. I mean, non-romantic plots.
I read one of the ones what was the name of it? You recommended it to me recently.
I recommended all of them to you, so I don't know which one you started with.
Read
was it a Paladin? Swordheart? Did you start with Swordheart?
Swordheart, yes.
Yeah.
And it was so good. I loved every minute of it. All the characters and the setup, the world building, like the Temple of the Rat. It was just amazing.
So good.
Absolutely amazing. And I loved it. And yeah, it was kind of very grown up romance, but quite guarded still. And so lovely. But just a really well written book. And the world building was exquisite in it. And it just complemented it all so well. Definitely.
And I think that's another thing J.D. Evans does well, too, in Reign and Ruin. It's beautiful world building. It's a really interesting, politically intriguing plot for a fantasy world with all these different actors. And that is also really compelling. And then there's a magic system. There's a lot of awesome standard fantasy elements going on. And then this fabulous romance as well. And I think that all of those things are really just prime examples of excellent writing. And I think a lot of the stigma against it is, again, a not conscious, but an inherent bias against things that are considered to be like women's fiction. And which is just like, you know, romance authors are laughing all the way to the bank with that, because they're just like successful romance authors are like, great, yeah, look down on me all you want, but here my, you know, paycheck.
Yeah, while I'm cashing my check.
Exactly.
So, and it's a massive market for it. But yeah, I think, Virginia, you're right. It's I don't even like the term women's fiction. I don't know what that was, but never mind. Something fell over, but I'm just going to pretend it didn't. You know, I don't even like the term women's fiction. Do we have men's fiction?
No, that's just the default.
That was my mistake there. Things like that. I just think that in itself is telling that we talk about that as women's fiction, as if there's not a cross divide that everybody can enjoy.
Right.
You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, even like action movies and stuff like that. I don't know if, you know, I love a really cheesy action movie. You know, but even like some of the ones like the 80s, you know, your Tango and Cash, Commando, you know, there's a love element in all of these. It might be a daughter, it might be a sister, you know, or whatever. But it's not like that's not a big part of those films, is it?
Yeah.
But because it's a man's film, it's like, it's not, you know, it's a side plot. But it's not love, it's not romance. But, okay.
Yeah. No, I hear it's a good point. Steve, let's hear your thoughts, brother, about what do you think about all this?
Well, it kind of surprises me how much grief romance gets, because who's reading them then? Because it's probably the most popular genre there is, right? So if everyone hates it, then where are all these books going? Like, what's going on? It's a big conspiracy. I'm fine with romance in books. If it serves the story, then I'm okay with it. And it's really unfortunate because there's been some books that I've recommended to people, and when I tell them, like One Way by Jeff Lane, I tell them it's a love story, but it's a thriller too, and it's a love story, I'm not going to bother. Or with Big Al by Night by Nicole Eisner, it's a vampire tale, but there's romance in the story. It's like, well, there's romance, there's horror, and it's like, oh, there's romance, I'm not gonna. But you're missing out on so many great stories, and I don't get why, just because if there's a love story, or there's, you know, the romance involved in the story, why is that a reason not to experience such a great story? So I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm not sure why it has such this negative, where people have this negative reaction to it's a love story, there's romance in the story, then why not? I don't
can you even do can you even do vampire stories without romance and love anymore? I don't know. Like certainly not the last 50 years, 60 years. I mean, going back to, Nosferatu, you see the old black and white film, like it's a love story too. Like, that's strange.
I do
Dracula
enjoy the
itself
idea
is a love
though of
story, isn't it?
witches.
Dracula.
Yeah, it's a love story, right?
Absolutely
All of Anne Rice's stuff, love story. Like,
Yeah, I enjoyed the love elements of that. I mean, 2 pages describing a table, not quite so much.
I do kind of love the idea though of telling vampire stories without a love story in them, because I do think it's still fun to just be like, but yeah, okay, sure, but what if we go back to vampire as villain? Because like instead of vampire as like sexy villain, just vampire is like, no, just straight up gonna eat you. Like I like both. I have nothing against vampire fantasy romance. Like I've definitely read a few and I've enjoyed some of them, and I also like, yeah, sure, if anybody wants to reintroduce vampires as just jerks, that's fine too. Like I'm not gonna make any blanket comments about whether
or as the good guys, the good guys or girls, the misunderstood, vampires that are, just creatures of their nature rather than malevolent, it's
not inherently anything.
Yeah.
Like, well, I have to have blood to survive, but I try to be nice about it, like that's cool too. I like that. Yeah.
It's so funny you brought that up, Virginia. It's actually like a scene in my book. They're talking about vampires because Aubrey, female character, she's sort of going, oh, are they not kind of romantic? And Cathel's just like, no, they're bloodsuckers, and I kill anyone I find. So she's got this kind of romantic notion about them as well. And as a fae, he's just like, no, they're not remotely nice. They will kill you. They're all horrible. And it's quite funny, like her growing up with this notion of it. And he's just like, no, not at all. There's nothing good about them. They just eat people.
I personally think, and Steve obviously is a big horror fan, like I think horror and romance really mesh well together. The ones that I've read, if it's well done, like I really love the element, and it just brings out that aspect of pathos, like especially if because of whatever the horror thread is that people's romances are doomed, or one party dies, or like I love that. I love when it's not just one thing. I love when people blend genres and subgenres and make it, mash it up and that's the beauty of being an indie, right? As Steve and I have talked about with other guests, that we can kind of do what we want to do, right? And not worry about no, you must stick with the Right. So yeah, I do enjoy that element of the freedom of being an indie writer. So, curiously enough,
one comment real quick. Right, so I agree. Romance and love in any form is part of the human experience. It's crazy to think that you wouldn't find an element in a well-rounded stories, regardless of genre.
Yep. I do think it's also important to acknowledge that there are lots of non-romantic, and I think this is sort of mentioned in her comment, that like love in other forms, right? That it doesn't have to be romantic love. Because I also think it's really, I really enjoy stories that don't focus on a romantic relationship, but do still focus on love between humans, right? They're just like either family or just platonic friendships and all of that love too. Like, and I don't know that it gets enough page time in a lot of books, or it's like it's all about the romantic relationship instead of like, oh no, these two people just really care about each other. There's nothing romantic going on, but they love each other and they want to help each other out. And I like seeing that stuff develop on the page too is really fun. So I think that's very
connections though, isn't it?
Yeah,
connecting to somebody. And
that's the point. Another favorite author of mine, friend Bjorn Larson, I love seeing characters that he has an asexual character, all of that representation is wonderful, and we need more and more of it. All forms of love, as you both said, not just romantic love or love between, a particular gender, non-binary. I love, Virginia, you had non-binary characters in Sarah's Claw, and, like that's all stuff that we need so much more of, right? But so with everything we'll be talking about, so if you look at the recent SBFBO, obviously we're still kind of in the after party for that, where it was so exciting and it came down to the wire, and you had Legacy of the Brightwash and Rain and Ruin at the end kind of going neck and neck, and all the other 8 finalists were phenomenal books and all just amazing. And the whole thing is really quite hyped, right? You look at what SPFBO in particular has become. It's become extremely hyped. Spotlight, it seems like the eyes of the writing community, especially the indie writing community, are on it. So where do you think independent writing is going, like based on things like SPFBO and what we're seeing with some of these other big contests, and also just the fact that Steve and I had talked about this with other guests, especially those involved with SPFBO. There's been now a number of SPFBO finalists and semifinalists who are pursuing traditional publishing, and being in contests like SPFBO directly have helped propel them into that world. I mean, if you want to do, I look at the two as being equal, just different sides of publishing. But if that's what your aspirations are, like SPFO or winning these big awards, someday PS, if you're looking to produce, pursuing traditional publishing, oh well, she would have page turnover, like or Virginia with SPFBO. So these things seem to matter. So where is indie going with the prominence that it's receiving with all these authors, and these awards? And
so it's interesting, right? Like, so SPFBO has can have a profound effect on any book's trajectory, right? It doesn't always, but it can, and it's a tough one. I think part of the issue is is the question of like where trad is going. So like indie exists because trad leaves so much uncovered, right? Like the gatekeeping behind traditional publishing means that there are a huge number of stories not being told or not being read from traditional publishing, and indie moves to fill that gap in a lot of ways. And what's cool is that I think the overall quality of indie books has met and in some cases surpassed that of trad books, right? One of the coolest things about like having so much control over cover art and design and all those features means that like indie books now can look like just their normal book form can look like the coolest special editions you've ever seen from trad, right? And that's awesome because we can just do that whenever we want. If we have the money to invest, we can just make that happen. And we don't have to be best-selling person, best-selling author in this whole host of authors at some massive publishing house to achieve it. You can just lay out the money for it and hope for the best, or run a Kickstarter for it and make it happen. Like there's just so many cool ways to do that. So like SPFBO highlights indie books beautifully, and I think Mark Lawrence makes a point in his description of the contest that the ultimate goal is not to receive traditional publishing deals. That would be an insult to indie publishing. I think that most people who enter SPFBO don't really have, well, I don't know, it's a mix now maybe, and don't necessarily have an interest in that. A lot of SPFBO winners and even just finalists and sometimes just semifinalists have wound up getting picked up by trad, and it's been a mixed bag as to how well that's gone for some people. I am friends with a number of authors for whom that's happened, and it's the results have been an interesting mix. For some people, it's been a massive career changer and amazing, and for others, trad has just tanked books of theirs that were doing well beforehand. It's not a guaranteed anything. And I think that indie exists to provide the stories that readers want and can't find elsewhere, right? Like that is the niche that we inhabit, and I think, and it's important, and it's I think one of the best things about indie is just like find your readers. If there's someone who wants your story, who are those people? And so SPFBO is great for highlighting indie books and is very helpful to the indie community overall because it does a great job of highlighting, like, here are all these books and they're being reviewed by these massive blogs that review a bunch of trad books too, and here's how they're ranked up, against each other and these trad books, and you can sort of get an idea of the overall quality, and isn't that cool? But it's not the only thing going, and there are some of the most massively successful indie authors have never entered SPFBO or have never won SPFBO or have never made it to the finals for SPFBO. Like I know a number of authors who make vast amounts more money than I do who've never had a book make it to the finals. But they are clearly doing something right, many things right, and they are, making very large livings off of their writing, and they've, Spiffo has not gone well for them, or they've never tried, right? And they're making way more than most trad authors because they get a much larger portion of their royalties, right? But so they've figured out marketing and they've made that work for them. And so I think, things like Spiffo are very helpful. And really cool, and I'm glad it exists, and it's a neat thing, and it's a neat community. And one thing it does really well, I think, is help build community. I am still close friends with all the other 9 finalists from my year, and I know that most of the Spiffo finalist groups have gotten close, and that's a really cool and sort of unparalleled thing that it's hard to recreate. And that's an amazing service. But I don't think it's definitely not the be all end all of IndiePub, and I don't think that it is even an excellent indicator of where IndiePub is going, because we see these really high profile books from Spiffo that get picked up by trad, but meanwhile books that are even more successful than those are just off doing their own thing, and you've never seen them on a Spiffo page, right? And they're selling like hotcakes, and they have a massive readership, and yeah. So I don't think it paints the whole picture, and I think where indie is going is to continue to go where trad isn't. And trad seems to be shrinking itself down even in many ways. Like there are a couple labels that are actually actively pursuing different stories, and that are more interesting and from more like varied authors and stuff, but a lot of big trad houses are just sort of collapsing on themselves. They've gate kept themselves into a corner, I guess, and now they can't get out. I don't know. So that's my answer.
Oh, me? Sorry, I wasn't sure. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Virginia said. Finding markets. I'm a big believer in if you love something that you've written, somebody else will too. And as I said at the start, it's so subjective what one person likes and what other person doesn't like, and things. I think my biggest issue with it, or I think my biggest issue, but I think potentially for themselves as well, is that trad publishing is so slow moving. They can't adapt on the fly. They can't change. I think the pandemic really showed that, in that indie authors were able to find new ways quickly to reach audiences or talk to their fans, or kind of get out there and make specials on books and say, oh well, it's going to be 99p, and or somebody's running a sale, they can work with another author and go, oh, let's do a group and we'll send that out. Trad can't do any of those things. It just can't. You can't speak to like the 4 of us suddenly go, oh, yeah, do you know what? We'll do a 4-person anthology and we can get together and we can put that out, and we don't need to speak to anybody, about doing that. And we can say, oh, well, that group over there is doing the same thing. Why don't we run a campaign together? We'll give both books for 99p for a week, and then whatever. Trad just hasn't been able to switch that way, and I genuinely think it's held them back. I mean, nobody obviously saw the pandemic coming as such, and so they couldn't expect that. But in the 2 years, they couldn't seem to get it together to do anything about it. You'd think in 2 years, somebody in those businesses would be going, oh, we need to adapt to this. What can we do? And they just didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite strange. And then they're almost kind of resigned to how slow they move. But I don't think it needs to be that way. It's almost as if they've chosen it and they're sticking with it, regardless of how effective it is. I find it quite odd.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve. No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, you and I have talked about this before, about how the book industry reminds us of the music industry in the late 90s. How they were just so stuck on their model, and they refused to change, and digital just took over. So you kind of see that same transition with the publishing industry, is that they're so stuck in what's worked for so long, they don't want to change, and it's going to be at their detriment, I think.
Yeah, hence traditional publishing, right? They are entrenched in their traditions, and they are not quick to change it. I don't know if because as you three also aptly pointed out, because of that inflexibility and that inability to be adaptable and be agile in how they do things, and I guess the whole, maybe in their mind, thinking that part of the prestige is that, hey, you have to wait 4 years for, the next, Victoria Aveyard book or Sarah J. Maas book or John Gwynne book. And there's this hype. And of course, it's going to be a preemptive, bestseller. And, that's part of what they do. But, like you said, it does seem rather inflexible and does seem like they're being left behind in a lot of ways that indies can just, as you said, the four of us wanted, as PS said, the four of us want to do an anthology today. Okay, hey man, you want to do this? Yep. Or are you good at cover? Yep. Virginia's got a Kickstarter. Steve's going to do that, and then we just do it. Right. And there's no one to say, well, you can't do that. You can't write an anthology on that. You can't, you can't be put out in that type. And guess what? We're not in a queue whereby if PS is the big writer of the three of us, and then she's got something else going on that has to come out first before anyone else's, then that it's all irrelevant. It's right. Just about what, so I love that about indie writing, that I don't have to wait 4 years to get, and as I said before, hats off. And if you're pursuing that as Virginia said, it works really well for some people. And if you're pursuing that line of publishing, hats off to you, and it's great and it's fantastic. There's lots of advantages. But for me, I cannot imagine sitting there waiting at the timeline of someone else for my book to come out 3, 4, 5 years, and sitting behind P.S. Livingstone or Virginia McClain or Steve because they're just bigger writers than me, right. And I just have to wait my turn because their book is more important to get out than mine.
Right.
Like,
I think that's it as well. And I mean, a question I've been asked of like a number of panels or whatever recently is, what trends are there within SFF? And I don't know that there really are trends within indie in the same way. You're not seeing, this type of book's really popular. Well, because I don't think there are as many like that. I just, the trend thing is just less relevant. But yeah, it is less relevant because
it exists, but it is less relevant.
But you find niches, and there's always different things. And I know there is within trad publishing too. But I mean, how many times have you've heard people going, as an agent or a publisher, we want something really, really unique and new. Well, they don't really. They want something like this with a wee twist of that. And so actually, I think most of the time, again, they don't take chances, because when they say we're looking for the new thing, they're not really. Whereas indie can offer that. It's, this is fresh, or this is a new idea on this, but they're not bound by that. For example, I hate the whole comp title thing. It's like, I hate having to come up with them. It's like,
it's hard.
Because you don't, first of all, you're like, well, is it really like that? Does it have some flavors of that? But you also don't want to come across like a giant asshole going, yes, well, I think you'll find I'm the next Robin Hobb. I'm Robin Hobb, he's Brandon Sanderson. Well, I'm clearly not, right? And it's always the risk that you make that comp, you look like a total ass.
Right.
And it's horrible. But if you're trad published, you need to do that much more so. Which big name person can I compare you to say you're going to be this? And that's really hard, I think, especially when you've got to do it yourself. It's like writers who call themselves legendary. It's so cringe. Somebody else has to call you that. You're not allowed to do it about yourself. And I think the comp title feels that way to me. So
it feels that way, but it's still a useful marketing tool, right? Like, and I think, it's different when it's in a blurb and it's like, for like fans of this and this and this will like this, right? Because you're not saying I'm the next.
I know, it's my own hate, to be honest. I just find it cringe.
But where's the originality? Why can't you be the P.S. Livingstone or the Virginia McClain? That's it. The old, I have lots of favorite authors, traditional and indie. Right. I'd love to be compared to whoever, Janie Wirtz, John Gwynne, Tim Hardy, you name it. Right. But I'm P.L. Stuart, is there room for me to just be me? Like the first one, the original, good or bad. Right. And that's part of the issue. Right. So legendary. I love that PS.
Just calling yourself legendary.
Listen, I have seen people do it, call themselves that in their own bio, and I'm like, you can't do that.
I'm just gonna blurb myself from now. I'm just gonna put legendary in quotes.
And his talk show talks about himself. Yeah, because that always gives a great impression. Listen, I will write it as I will write it and put it I give you a blurb for your next book if you promise not to call yourself that. I don't think I can let you do it.
Oh, okay. Well, if you say I can't, I won't. So.
Okay, I'll write it for you. That's totally
okay. There you go. Yeah, because you could. You probably write a lot better than I could. I'm pretty sure about that. So.
It's just gonna be one word: legendary, and that's it.
There you go. That's perfect, and you can put that on every cover. Like,
exactly. Yeah. 5 stars, legendary.
Save me a lot of print costs. Just one word, right? I just want to quickly ask as we're winding down. So, can you each tell us what are some of the authors you've been reading recently that you've really enjoyed? What are some of the titles you're excited about seeing, maybe future coming out, or things you want to read you haven't read, or here's time to kind of get out there and plug some of your faves or authors that you're looking forward to, you've heard good things about, or things like that. Can you?
Well, one of the last books I read was Forging a Nightmare, which is Patricia A. Jackson's book, which I loved. I really loved it. It was like a brilliant, wonderful mishmash of mythologies and sort of very much Bible, but bringing in all the other stuff and just kind of going, haha, it's all crazy. And and Virginia and I are big fans of Patty's anyway, because she's just, if you're looking for someone to interview, she's amazing. You will laugh the entire time, I'm fairly certain.
Writing it down.
Yes, well, definitely. So yeah, Forging a Nightmare was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I read, obviously, Legacy of the Brightwash. I want to read Thingy in Ruin. It's just gone out of my head. Somebody help me. Just one spiffbo.
Rain and Ruin, yeah.
JD. Rain and Ruin, right? I knew it was something in Ruin. The first word just went out of my head. That's on my list. I didn't manage to get to that before the end, because I've been working my way through some of those. Was really good. Living Waters, Dan Fitzgerald's book.
Dan's really enjoyed. Awesome. He's awesome.
Yes, yeah, he's great. I really like him. So there's some stuff I've read recently and really enjoyed. A couple of things that I know are out on submission, so I won't name them just in case. But people who are submitting at the moment, and there's some really good stuff. I hope it gets picked up so that everybody else gets to read it. So Hala Williams' stuff is great. I hope she gets picked up because her book's brilliant. I love it. So yeah, that's my recommendations at the moment anyway.
I've just finished reading Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I basically will always interrupt anything in my TBR to dive into the latest T. Kingfisher book, which was extra hard this time because I am also currently reading Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, which is the sequel to Black Sun, which I adored, and I am really loving Fevered Star. I just, I got distracted by Nettle and Bone, and then I haven't read anything again since then, so that the next thing I'm getting back into is the Fevered Star. I'm really looking forward to the sequel to Shadows of Ivory, which I read Shadows of Ivory earlier this year. Did I read it? I can't remember if I read it before it was entered in Spiffbo or after, by T.L. Greylock, and it came in third. And it is excellent, and I really, it's just such a cool adventure story. Don't be fooled by the cover. The cover of Shadows of Ivory makes it look like a grimdark novel. It is not. It is a action adventure fantasy story with in elements of Indiana Jones and the Mummy. It's but more societally aware. There's a lot of elements of but should we be taking artifacts from other cultures or giving them back to the people they belong to, which is a great thing to see in something that addresses archaeology, right? So that's really cool. And the sequel comes out soon, in the next couple of weeks. And I've forgotten the title, but the cover was just revealed on Fantasy Hive and a few other websites, and it's gorgeous. And so I'm really, really excited for that one. I also plan to read the sequels to Rain and Ruin. There are 3 or 4 other books in that series. They're all set in the same world, but following different characters, I believe, and I'm looking forward to reading those, and lots more, but we'll just go with that for now.
I'm going to say also PL's second book, because I love the first one, so I have to read the second one as well, so that's on my list.
And the first one is sitting at the top of my TBR as well.
It's really good. You're going to love it, Virginia.
I know. I think
it's right up your alley.
I'm very excited about it.
I'm honored. Well, thank you.
It's so great.
Okay, so as you guys have been wonderful. It's been so amazing to have you both
Well,
on.
thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah,
Looking
thanks
forward
for
to this all week. So this has been awesome. As we're winding down, can you let the audience know where is best to find you, your preferred social media platforms, where we can buy your books? Where do you prefer it bought through your website? I know for PS, it's a case of when yours comes out, which we're so anticipating. So
Wait with bated breath.
can you give us all that info? I will be.
Twitter is where you'll find me, at PS Livingstone with an E at the end. Like the
No.
person, the explorer, not the place. Not that anybody actually who's probably watching knows that Livingston is a really small town in Scotland. So that probably was completely irrelevant, but never mind, moving on. You can also find me at my website, www.pslivingstone.com, which has got actually all of my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, which I'm very rarely on Facebook and Twitter. Sorry, Facebook and Instagram, mostly because I don't know how to work Instagram. I don't get it as a
Join the
platform.
club. Join the club.
I'm not the only one. I'm just sorry. I
Oh.
honestly think that loads of times I've shared something on Instagram and it turns out I haven't. I did that for almost all of QuaranCon. I kept thinking I'd gone, but it didn't, and I don't know. Anyway, sorry. So yes, I'm there. All my stuff, editing services, books, short stories, blogs, me rambling is all available on my website. So yeah.
Nice. I can be found at virginiamcclain.com or virginiamcclain.ca. Slightly different websites, although they are links to each other, but they're both my blog / website. But .ca is the one that actually has the store. If anyone would like to buy hard copies directly from me and then order potentially signed book plates. I don't actually ship straight from here. Shipping from Canada, super expensive.
Not to Canada. No, not to Canada.
From Canada. So shipping from Canada.
Yeah, but I'm in Canada, so if I want them, I can.
True. That is true.
Yeah,
yes, and I do have some in stock. I could actually send you a signed copy.
Oh.
But I mostly just I ship straight from Ingram to whoever is ordering and can do a signed book plate that is much cheaper to mail from here. But even within Canada, it's not that cheap. But still, I can do it. Yes. Okay. So Twitter, I'm at Gwen Damned. It's a long story, but that's GWENDAMNED. And honestly, between that and my website, you can find me if you need to track me down.
Okay, awesome. And Mr. Steve, where can most people find you, your preferred platforms, and things like that?
Well, I'm in agreement. I don't get Instagram either. I don't for books. I don't get it. I don't understand but everyone likes what they like. I'm mostly on Twitter, and I also use Vero because it doesn't have any ads or an algorithm, so it's kind of weird. But I like using those two platforms most of all. But of course, YouTube is the best place. Comments.
Yeah, and Steve's channel, for those of you out there who haven't checked it out, oh my gosh, like the amount of content and the different types of content is just phenomenal, just so diverse. It's great stuff. And of course, page chewing is just one part of what Steve does. He does a lot of different things, from book deep dives to readings, short story readings, interviews, separate interviews of the page chewing. He's just so much stuff. Great content. So kudos to Steve, and kudos to Steve for providing this platform for all of us. Thank you, Steve, because this is Steve's channel. I'm just along for the ride. This is his channel. He does all the hard work. I just show up and chat. So
you do all the heavy lifting for this one. You do all the work. So I have no idea what I'm doing, and thankfully you're here to help. So
I don't know. We're just fumbling on together, brother, because I don't know what I'm doing either. So
you're both excellent. You're both doing a great job.
As PS said, we fake it till we make it. So, that's what we're all about. So
fake it. That's
good life advice.
Yeah.
It turns out that's what everyone is doing. They just don't always admit it.
Well, we're just more honest about it. That's all.
Yeah, just blagging it. Is that a term people know? Blag it?
Blag it. That's a Scottish term, yes.
If you're blagging it, you're just kind of making it up as you go along.
Well,
that's my other favourite pastime, is teaching people new Scottish words.
We played that game at the CornCon party.
We did the CornCon
Oh.
part. It was I can't do it because we're being good, but it
Yeah.
was Scottish insults, and then everybody was I would put them in the notes, and everybody would then try and work out what they actually meant. And actually, some of the guesses were funnier than the actual real thing.
Is there like a Scottish urban dictionary where I can look up
There is,
like
yeah, there is,
Scotticisms? Okay, I have to do
Scotticism,
that.
yeah.
That's a high place I want to see. Like on my bucket list, my wife, her background is Scottish, so we want to get there. I just want to see the castles and the moors and the heather and all that stuff. So
absolutely. Well, WorldCon Glasgow 2024.
Ooh, maybe we'll come out and see you then. You never
Exactly.
know. Yeah.
Blag of space on my floor before it's gone. Virginia already claimed the couch.
I claimed the couch.
Oh, okay. Well, Dad and I can sleep on the floor. We can bring our sleeping roll-out blankets and stuff. And
That's all good.
Easy.
There you go. You have 2 years to plan it, no problem.
Okay.
I guess I should plug the CornCon website and YouTube. So our YouTube channel exists and is where you can still find all of our content. And so if anybody
Including a
wants
reading by P.L Stuart.
including a
thank
fabulous reading by P.L Stuart.
It was amazing. Thanks so much for having me. And CornCon is an amazing event, and I recommend. I assume it's going to be just even bigger and better for 2023/3.
2023. It's already we did 2022.
You did 22.
That's done.
That's in the books, right? So yeah, you guys are recovering.
We're recovering, but we do have high hopes to return in 2023.
Okay.
Although it will probably be November.
Yeah.
If we do it, to give us more time to plan instead of panicking over the space of a month and having nervous breakdowns.
Yeah, we could skip the nervous breakdowns this year. That'd be
great.
We
skip the nervous breakdowns. So we're going to give ourselves a longer lead-in time, but we hope. But yeah, we would like to.
Okay, awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
And we obviously are automatically having to book the two of you, so that's a given.
Oh,
please come.
Yeah.
Steve's like, I don't even know.
Steve's like, what? Yeah.
Consider yourself.
Steve, you're a VIP, man. Come on, these things you have to be part of them, right? So.
Yeah, and we do have continuing content, which Virginia is definitely better at than I am.
I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like, it's kind of like my hobby. I'm just like, hey, do you want to do an interview?
Yeah, so we do a bunch throughout the year, but hopefully we'll be better at that as well, doing bits and bobs. When I say we, I really mean me, because I did kind of abandon you for most of those last year.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, I don't ever expect anyone else to help out with the continuing content stuff. I feel like it's just like something I randomly do in my free time. But you have said a couple of times that you would maybe like to get together some workshops or panels, instead of just the one-person one-on-one interviews, which we can absolutely do. So yes, if you want to do that.
Yeah, you hear that, authors? Apply for CornCon. It is awesome. I had the privilege of participating in reading this year, thanks to PS in Virginia, and it was a great experience. So, and
we loved having you.
Oh, thank you. Now we know we're going to get Steve.
Please come back next year.
Oh, absolutely. Now we know we're going to get Steve too. So that's awesome.
I don't know what I do, but
he's still like, what?
We've already volunteered you, Steve. It's too late. You're in.
Yeah. So. No backsies. Sorry.
Don't invite me because I'll show up. So be careful.
Oh, you're invited.
We want you to. Yeah, you're totally invited.
Yeah.
I'll let Steve close it all off, and let him send us off as I mute myself here.
Sure. Well, thanks again. Obviously, PL, for this great series we've been doing, and it's been a blast. And thanks to Pam and to Virginia for coming by, spending some time with us, having a good laugh, and learning a lot. I learned a lot today about all kinds of sorts of things. So, thank you for taking time. Of course, everyone, thanks for coming by to chat with us in the comments or in the chat. So, really appreciate it, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks very much.
Everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.